Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Commercial Awareness Compass. This is your weekly guide to developing your commercial insight in a way that goes beyond just the news. Each week, we focus on one major story and we break it down for you at 3 levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So whether you're new to commercial awareness or you have some kind of understanding already, the goal is to help you move up a level each week. So we'll break down today's story in a way that's easy to follow and gives you practical insights to use in applications and interviews. I'm Tori. I'm a future trainee solicitor, and I'm joined today by Henry, who is a lawyer and a content creator. Thank you so much for being here, Henry. I'm really excited for our chat today. So today we're going to talk about the election of Donald Trump as the next president of the United States and how this might impact UK law firms. So for our viewers, as we go through the beginner, intermediate, and advanced levels, I encourage you to focus on how each explanation builds on the last. So we're going to start with understanding the basics, then we'll see how business and industries are impacted, and finally explore the strategic thinking that goes into helping clients manage new challenges. So starting with the beginner level, Henry, could you please set the scene for us? What is the story that we're talking about today?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, thank you for having me. And yes, so Donald Trump was recently elected as the 47th president of the US and will officially take office in January 2025 following his official inauguration, which is kind of the process by which he legally assumes the power and the responsibility of being the US president. So that's kind of the story in a nutshell. And the re-election of Donald Trump raises a number of legal and also policy implications for businesses in the UK that may be looking to operate within the US or work with sort of US companies. But whilst this may impose some sort of legal and policy sort of challenges, it also offers law firms a lot of opportunities for sort of increased legal work, because there are going to be some new policies that Trump puts in place that will affect businesses that operate in the UK, but also kind of trade out to the US or that kind of in partnership with US companies. For example, one of those changes could be the rollback of US regulations. We've seen that Donald Trump is quite a fan of deregulation, particularly on things like environmental standards or financial services. So this could lead to sort of increased divergence from sort of the UK and EU standards, where maybe we've got a particular regime, the US has a different regime, and then lawyers will have to kind of guide and advise businesses on how they can successfully and legally operate within both markets on these different regimes.
Mm-hmm. Great, thanks. I think this is really helpful for our audience as well, because at least I know for myself, when I was first learning about the world of law, I always thought of the work of lawyers as really dealing with kind of contentious matters and cases. So I think it is really, really useful for us to talk about how lawyers can assist in these kind of regulatory changes. I also thought it might be helpful at this beginner level to think about, just in general, is it usually the case that an election would be something that people would pay attention to from a commercial awareness perspective? Because I know that in 2024, we've had a lot of elections, so not just in the US. So are elections typically something that should cause us to think, commercially about regulatory changes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the role of a law firm and sort of the legal advisors within it, the lawyers, are to ultimately advise businesses on one, how they can operate legally, but also kind of horizon scanning and looking ahead and seeing what changes are coming in to then enable us to advise clients to say, this new policy is coming in, this is how it's going to affect your business, these are some legal implications, this is what we could consider. And then that's when all the different aspects of the law firm that you're working in, whether that be employment, tax, M&A, would all kind of have to work together to advise businesses on whatever that sort of change is. Because ultimately, whenever there is an election, this subsequently follows with changes in policies and sort of legal and regulatory frameworks, whether that's in the UK, the US, across Europe, wherever that may be.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so that's super helpful. I think we are kind of moving into the intermediate stage, really, because now we're thinking about what is the role of legal advisors then. So In this situation, we've had an election, a new candidate will be entering office, you said, in January. So then, yeah, why is this something that law firms care about? What is the type of relevance this would have for lawyers?
Yeah, I think if we focus on sort of UK businesses, because most people watching this will be looking at sort of training contracts here within the UK. And if we stick with what we mentioned in the beginner stage, RE, the regulatory compliance, and as we mentioned, Trump is quite a fan of deregulation, which ultimately means reducing regulatory oversight from sort of official bodies. Which ultimately allows US companies to act in certain ways and move more freely without sort of the burden of the cost of compliance. If we take, for an example, here in the UK, law firms are regulated by the SRA. There are costs associated with that compliance. Trump is effectively looking at reducing, again, for example, the SRA's regulatory oversight on a profession, the legal profession. So whilst businesses may benefit from Trump's pro-business agenda and this deregulation, that's great for US businesses that are operating within the US. But if we take an international business in the UK, this is where we could have more sort of negative implications. And then it may make it more costly or more sort of inefficient for UK businesses to operate within the US. And again, that's the role of a law firm to advise businesses on how to successfully and cost efficiently operate within that country. Another example is sort of the environmental standards. And I think there's a lot of policies around globally sort of environmental sort of regulation and compliance, because obviously global warming is a issue that's facing all of us, is affecting all of us. But we've seen that Trump's team have kind of expressed an intention to kind of withdraw from the Paris Agreement, which is a global pact to ultimately try and fight climate change, because that's going to affect it's something that's going to affect us in all of our lifetimes, and it's something that businesses are starting to take more seriously. You'll see that a lot of law firms that you're applying to join will have ESG policies and agendas and committees within those organizations. But if we go back to sort of Trump reducing its compliance with these environmental obligations, what we are then going to see is businesses in the UK trying to operate in the US, but there are different regulatory regimes. So it's going to be difficult for those businesses to ensure that they are being compliant in this country and also this country. So they will need law firm advice to say, okay, you need to do this in this country, but also if you want to operate in the US, where there's been a huge overhaul, you will also need to do X, Y, and Z, or you may not have to do X, Y, and Z. So there will be this sort of regulatory gap, which in turn can create compliance issues for organizations. So basically, practically, it's going to be the role of a lawyer to kind of help identify the client's sort of gaps in their regulatory compliance and ensuring that whatever that gap is, how can we plug to that gap to ensure that that business is always sort of at the forefront and is not getting left behind on that. I think one of the a useful example is if we take specifically here in the UK, when sort of the GDPR was introduced back in around like 2018. Around then, there was a huge overhaul that businesses suddenly had to get up to date. Everybody was learning what GDPR was the first time, so it's the role of the lawyer to be aware of what these potential implications are from Trump being elected, foresight scanning and saying, okay, this is likely to affect you. And that's where lawyers can really add value, more than just saying this is the law, actually sort of fully understand what the client's business is, what sectors they operate in. And then we can say, well, this change in the US, you've got, I don't know, you operate out of Florida as well. We've seen this is going to affect you, and kind of always be sort of on the sort of the front foot.
Mm-hmm. I think you outlined that really helpfully, especially in the sense of if we have a business that's operating exclusively in the US, this might not be as complicated for them because they're subject to one single regulatory framework. But when we're talking about businesses which operate internationally, then they're subject to different rules in different countries. So that was just a really helpful overview, I think, of how then this does become relevant for lawyers in the UK advising companies that operate internationally.
Yeah.
You also,
sorry,
oh,
sorry. I was just going to add as well. It's also worth, if you're at the stage where you're sort of applying for training contracts, look at on the law firm's website that you're applying to what kind of clients that they have. Because if you go to an interview, for example, and you start talking about the impact of the US on their clients' and they don't actually work with any clients that operate in the US, that's always just worth keeping in mind to make sure that actually you're tailoring the advice that you give to the sort of the relevant clients that organization or firm actually do have.
Thank you so much. It's so helpful for you to apply this in the context of researching for these applications at law firms. One thing I was going to ask was, you used a specific term. I would put this under our basic heading, but I just want to use this opportunity to clarify it for our viewers. You used the term ESG. So could you just explain what that is?
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry, forgive me. That is effectively environmental and sort of social governance to ensure that basically organizations meet certain check marks in terms of kind of environmental standards and sort of societal sort of, it's kind of like just socioeconomics and all of that fun stuff. So what law firms will find is that when they are tendering for business, which is basically when a law firm is, let's just say I'm a bank and I need some law firms to assist me with some work. What that bank will do is they will put out what's known as a tender or an invite to tender, where law firms can then basically pitch themselves to do that work. And that's kind of how a lot of law firms will get big clients. Me as the bank, when I'm looking for a new law firm to partner with or to sit on my panel of law firms, will want to make sure that that law firm meets certain criteria from an environmental, socio-economic, sort of social mobility governance perspective. And we're seeing a lot of clients now are valuing or rating environmental impacts or environmental policies high up on the agenda. And that's something that firms should keep in mind. And it's just something to be aware of.
Okay, thank you so much for explaining that. So I guess, did you want to move on to the advanced level, or were there any more reflections you wanted to add under this intermediate heading?
I think I'm okay, unless there's anything you wanted to further clarify. We can just delve into it in the next stage.
Yeah, sounds good. I mean, I think that you've outlined just so perfectly about exactly why businesses care, because of course they need to make sure they're following the rules. They need to know what the rules are. And then I think you've explained also so helpfully how lawyers play a role in that. So I think we can move on then to the advanced level. At this level, we're really exploring strategic thinking and also big picture thinking. So seeing broader trends or additional issues. So what kinds of issues do you think that a student or a candidate would need to be aware of when they're trying to demonstrate an advanced level of commercial awareness?
Yeah, and I think just on the point, Ari, sort of commercial awareness in its essence is effectively understanding how certain things can impact business, sort of commercial considerations that a business need to take, and it's the law firm's job to understand what those risks are and those commercial considerations are and advise clients accordingly. So if we go back to Trump being re-elected as president, we've touched on sort of the deregulation aspect of things and the regulatory gap that can apply. And we've also touched on it from an environmental perspective. But just kind of horizon scanning myself and sort of looking at the sort of things that the Trump administration are looking to kind of implement, is one of the big things is also in respect of a deregulatory approach to artificial intelligence, which is hot topic right now. So many businesses are looking to implement AI tech in some capacity. And it's also interesting to note that Trump has or is intending to appoint Elon Musk to his team, which he is very big in the AI space. If we just take a look at sort of the various projects that he's working on, which that in itself is a whole topic that's not for now. So whilst this deregulatory approach to AI is exciting if you're a company building AI tech, and it kind of accelerate AI development, it's also going to lead to a lot of inconsistencies, again, in terms of safety, compliance, and potentially complicating the sort of the landscape for business. So again, we have that issue that I'm a startup in London. I've created this super cool AI tech. I'm compliant here in the UK, but I also want to move my AI tech to the US, where there is a huge push for this kind of technology. But how do I ensure that the regulatory remit that I'm dealing with here in the UK and in Europe and also in the US? Because I don't know what that is. And again, that's the role of the lawyer to be aware of this. And we're seeing a lot more law firms now have specific AI teams within their organizations who will be able to advise, who will be keeping their eyes on what these changes are and ultimately what this means for business, to kind of ensure that clients have been advised appropriately of any potential challenges that they may face, with potentially different regulatory landscapes. And that advice could be, I don't know, that actually it's not viable for you to operate in that US market right now. Or it could be, actually, why don't you shift a lot more of your work to the US because that's going to be better for you. That's our role as lawyers. One of the other issues that probably concerns more sort of traditional trade is the result in sort of increased tariffs, which is, I think we've seen in Trump's previous term, something he's quite a fan of, is sort of increasing tariffs to ultimately encourage sort of local manufacturing, development, and all of that stuff. Tariffs, for those that don't know, are effectively taxes that are imposed on imported goods. So increased tariffs will then in turn result in foreign products, say products from the UK being imported to the US, becoming more expensive, which obviously isn't great if you're a UK company and you're shipping product over to the US. It's going to cost you more, which can then make domestic sort of industries more cost efficient for people within the US by comparison. But ultimately, it's then the consumers that get impacted because they have to pay for it. But that then is more of a sort of a commercial decision for that business. Do we want to keep selling into that country where the customers will be paying more? So taxing all imports would ultimately hit UK businesses quite negatively, particularly businesses that send quite a lot to the US, and they can include things like the car industries, medicinal industries, and also alcohol. So then as lawyers, we need to be advising our clients of the changes in any tariff rules and whether it's still financially viable for them to continue to keep sort of importing into the US. Or it could be that on review of those clients' businesses, actually, let's have a chat and we can say, this might be a better market for you to operate in, or we could change your product offerings to kind of help avoid high tariffs. And one of those ways could be looking to set up production in a tariff-free location. But again, these are all commercial considerations that it's our role to be looking at, assessing, and adding value to clients. There's no point in sending an email to say, hi, CEO of X company, there's been a tariff change. What we need to be doing is saying, so what does that actually mean? There's been a change in this. This is what it means for your business. Here is a potential solution that we think may fit for you. Let's discuss. And that's kind of how lawyers will see in the sort of the new year, when Trump is kind of brought into the White House, what we'll see a lot of law firms doing.
Nice. That explanation was so helpful, I think, to see how the lawyer's role is really as this strategic commercial advisor. I think when I was starting out, I did picture that what a lawyer would do is send the email, here are the rules. This is a bullet point list of the rules. This is how you follow the rules. But I think it's that additional piece that's so crucial to the commercial awareness of really putting it into context for that client of why that actually matters to them. And I think it was really helpful that you outlined that advice might even mean saying you should put more of your business operations in this country or less. So I think that's just really clearly illustrating how these considerations, they go beyond just the legal, and you do have to understand how the business works. I wanted to ask you, because so if the lawyer's role is to be this strategic commercial advisor, would you say that this then requires lawyers to be quite proactive about knowing when regulatory changes might occur? Would you say lawyers are more reactive, that the law changes and then they're working on it, or is it that they see that this might change and then before the change happens are thinking about what that means for their clients?
Yeah, exactly. So we if we take a regulatory change that's coming in, for example, let's stick with Trump. Trump's coming in January. We all know that. Okay, so what lawyers will be doing is what they should be doing is reading and seeing what these potential changes are and what the potential implications to the businesses that operate within their specific sectors will face. And that's a good way to kind of add value to what your clients want from you. You can't say concretely, let's do X, Y, and Z until the changes have happened, because you may think this is happening and suddenly there could be a huge U-turn. But the lawyer's role is to constantly be horizon scanning. And many of the firms that you guys will be applying for, if you go onto their websites, they will have designated horizon scanning, like newsletters or articles or topics of conversation that are going to impact clients. So it's very much the role of a lawyer to, as we mentioned, not just bullet point what changes are coming into effect, because a lot of your clients, like, they will know, they watch the news, they read the news, they will see what's about to happen, but they won't necessarily understand how it's going to affect them. So that's where we then take our legal brains and say, cool, I have clients that operate within that area. This is how that change is going to affect them. Let's advise accordingly.
And if we also think about this issue of AI that you brought up, which I'm really glad that you did, it's certainly a very hot topic.
Yes.
So we're seeing that it could be the case that in the US, regulations related to AI could be changing. Do you think this could be a broader trend as well, that this is something we should be alert to in other countries as well, that this is like a thing where there might be many different changes related to AI?
Yeah, and I think if we take a look at, so the US is, Trump is very sort of pro AI, and he wants to deregulate a lot of the structures around it to allow sort of development more fast paced. We're also seeing the UK and Europe have like conversations around AI. There are meetings, there are papers left, right, and centre. There are potential regulations, rules, and laws coming into effect. And AI is a very fast developing area. So it's going to be a case that the law is constantly playing catch up, whether that's here in the UK, Europe, or the US. And the point still stands that we need to be alert to what these changes are. What's the white paper saying? What's government discussing? How is this going to impact businesses? Because all businesses are looking at, well, most businesses are looking at, even law firms are looking at implementing AI tech in some capacity. So what are the issues? If we again stick with sort of the US and the UK, is I could be using, or I'm a business, the business could be using tech here that is compliant, because the AI is going to process a lot of data. It's using X, Y, and Z. But if we then take a look at, I think, the regulatory remit between the UK and the US in terms of like data, and data processing is currently based off what I think is still called the Privacy Shield for international data transfers, but Trump may change that. So if we're processing data, I think ChatGPT, Microsoft, whoever it may be, have all their sort of server data processing farms in the US. What do we need to ensure that UK businesses are complying with to ensure that any data processing that's happening over here and UK data that's being over here and processed, how do we keep that information basically secure and private and compliant with UK data protection regimes? So it's, whilst you may think it's a small issue, there are so many offshoots from it that we need to be considering, and that's where the various different teams within law firm have to come together and sort of say, this is going to impact, we need this team's input, we need this team's input. So it's a really exciting time, and there's so much for sort of junior lawyers, those looking to kind of get into the legal profession, to consider.
Yeah, I think that there's so many interesting things to talk about really here. We have just a few minutes left, so I thought I would just check with you if there's anything you wanted to add for how our aspiring lawyers who are watching this could reflect on this story in their interviews, or just really demonstrate strong commercial awareness more generally.
I would just say that this is a really big topic, and there are so many like points to consider from it, particularly with so many firms having sort of US clients or clients that operate in the US, or firms that have US offices. This is all going to sort of become more prevalent in January when he takes office, and it's sort of around that time applications close, and you'll be going into sort of interviews or assessment centers. So this is a really big, really interesting topic, and there are so many different ways that you can integrate parts of this story into sort of any answers around sort of commercial awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots of material. So thank you so much, Henry. These insights have been really, really useful. And thank you to our viewers as well for tuning in to the Commercial Awareness Compass this week. Please remember that commercial awareness is more than just staying on top of the news. It really is about understanding why these events matter to clients and how you, as a future lawyer, can provide strategic value, which I think, Henry, you've outlined for us so well today. So to our viewers, whether you're at the beginner, intermediate, or advanced level, the key takeaway for you is to approach each story with a curious and analytical mindset. So keep asking, what does this mean for clients? What would a law firm do to help? And that's the mindset that will really help you stand out in your interviews. So join us next week to keep building your commercial awareness. And until then, prepare without the panic.